Hello and welcome to the Gentrified Gentleman podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Lone Ranger and Tonto fistfight into heaven. This book was written by Sharman Alexie, and it's an anthology of a bunch of different stories. I'm here joined by my gracious and very handsome and very beautiful co-hosts.
I'm Christopher Whittington.
I'm Maddox Burr.
And I'm Jackson Moorhead.
So, to start, I already talked about kind of the structure of the book as an anthology. There's three kind of main characters that this book kind of follows. I just wanted to ask, what are your guys' kind of thoughts and opinions on these characters? Did you guys enjoy these characters? Did you feel things for them?
I mean, I don't know about you, but James, when he got cancer, heart went out to him. I did not like Norma because, she cheated. She was chill, but she did cheat, and you already know, bros before hoes, we don't with this around here.
I was going to say, I definitely relate more to James coping with everything via humor as opposed to having cancer portion. Also, Thomas Builds the Fire is really cool. I don't know how to describe it. He's just really cool, just in the way he talks and whatnot.
Norma cheating was definitely not cool, but I actually really liked her character.
Oh, she's a really solid character.
Yeah, she just her kind of holding up the community on her back, I think was really cool. And then not only her, but we talked about Thomas Builds the Fire, who has his weird visions and the stories he tells. He was just a fun character, but also had some interesting things to say, which we'll probably get into later. And then Victor, I think, was just kind of he kind of felt like I don't know how to describe him, maybe the disaster character or the character that was just I think they even refer to him as being a mess. Maybe Norma refers to him as that. I'm blanking on it, but yeah, I think the characters are definitely super interesting.
I feel like a big part with the characters, right, is again, I know in the last book we talked about how the characters got muddled, but that was just because there was so many of them. But I feel like this one, they didn't always make it clear they were switching, because I feel like a third character in spirit, I guess, would be the Indian experience, which is a big thing that this book was covering overall.
Definitely.
I would say so, yeah.
I'd say so, yeah. Maybe sub that out with the actual reservation itself, but it's basically the same thing. I'd say Victor is more of almost like a metaphor for the. Maybe not. I don't know how to describe it. Well, I think what the author was trying to do with him was have him be we were talking about the Native American experience and whatnot. I think he kind of embodies the misery of that experience. His parents' marriage falls apart, his uncles are constantly fighting. I guess that kind of summarizes my thoughts on Victor's place in the general messaging / themes of the book.
So, I also just wanted to ask this. Do you guys think that it being an anthology helped it tell more of a story about what it is like to be Native American, or, what the culture's like, or what the intricacies of how the family structure is? Do you think it being an anthology helped display that better, or do you think it would have been easier if it was one character that we constantly heard the inner thoughts of throughout the entire book?
No, it being an anthology absolutely contributed, because I feel like having it jump around, it felt almost as if it was supposed to be chapters of the author's life. Mm-hmm. The book didn't feel like it had any particular direction, but that's also what, in my opinion, made it work so well.
Honestly, kind of playing off of what you said there, it's the story of the reservation, of the Spaghetti tribe. I think the whole point of it being an anthology series is to just show all these different types of people and all these different parts that come together to make up what is, life living on a reservation, or, calling home your home a reservation, So, everybody kind of talks about how everyone comes back to the reservation being that they can't feel like they can escape, with Junior Palatkin, who, graduated from high school and went to college. He went to college, but when he went there, he almost immediately had a kid accidentally, so he ended up dropping out and coming back to the reservation. So I think it's just kind of a poetic, almost depiction of how they're trapped in a cycle, while also just trying to, just really try to show you the evolution. It's kind of counter to what you would think. Like, it doesn't really evolve as much as you might think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm
I thought stayed the same, and felt like a big part of the story was the fact that, okay, the characters in it, they just kind of were, if that makes sense. They didn't have,
That actually makes sense because they didn't have arcs, right?
they didn't have arcs. They just kind of were, and everything kind of was. And I feel like that kind of leans into a Native American philosophy that you don't have to have a direction in life. Sometimes you're there just to experience.
And that kind of brings me back to a quote in the book that I jotted down because I thought was it kind of connected to that. Um, it's it was cruel, but it was real, and it's just kind of goes back to that whole like, while it may not be that poetic ending that you want, it's real. So at the end of the day, it's just kind of you being and being, you know. So it's like no matter what, even if it sucks, you're kind of in this situation anyway, so it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
real.
And I gotta
Literally.
say, like, despite the fact that none of us can say we've experienced what it's like to live on a reservation, I think, Sherman Alexie did such a good job conveying the vibe. I could literally picture everything he was saying despite every story being so short. Like, it's hard to describe, but, like, he did just a really good job with the setting overall.
The book felt not refined, which I think helped it. It felt very raw. It felt like there was no like meticulous picking apart to try and make it, try and add any crazy verbiage to make it seem more intelligent. It was incredibly raw, and I think that's what helped it be a lot more touching for, I guess, just like my reading sense. It came out much more authentic.
It
Out
just
of
is the experience, I think. It's just the human experience, the experience of being a Native American on a reservation. It just is experience.
I absolutely loved it because every single character, they genuinely felt real.
I mean, some people just don't go through arcs in life. Some people stay stagnant. Some people move on and change and whatnot. Again, it's just real. It's just the human experience, at least through this specific lens, condensed into 200, I want to say 48 odd pages.
And another quote that I think kind of goes back, I think it's a good tie-in, or like it ties it all together, would be I don't need to believe anything. It just is. To me, that's like such a good way to just summarize how this book felt. It was like there was no God to kind of change the way the book needed to be structured. There was nothing that made it extremely like divine or anything that made it extremely verbose. It was just kind of a book that was extremely raw in its description of what it means to be human.
I actually 100% agree with that because going off of what we knew from 100 Years of Solitude, I expected to come into this book, learning a lot more about Native American culture specifically. But what I ended up getting was, this interpretation of Native American life in a, more modern world as opposed to just a focus on, cultural differences and such. It's more an evaluation of or a reflection of how what happened to Native Americans, in American history, has left them in almost a feeling of like stagnance today.
I was also going to say that line, I think, relates a lot to just a lot of the subject matter of the book. A lot of the book is focused on coping mechanisms between our various main characters. Victor and his alcohol and drugs, James Many Horses with his humor. You can even argue Thomas builds the fire, dissociates commonly. I mean, he also takes drugs. A lot of them just deal with it as it is. I guess they accept that deep down, but a lot of the book is dedicated to them kind of almost trying to avoid that true reality, even though they know it's there.
Do you guys think that Thomas Crazy Horse, looking at it this perspective, was kind of meant to be a sort of looking glass into the Native American past and how they are disconnected from it, even though it is still there? That's kind of why he was shunned by society and whatnot. All right, thank you, chat.
Moving away from that, I kind of just want to ask, right? Well, I got my own favorite chapter. So, do each of you guys have your own kind of favorite chapter or story that you thought spoke out to you? And I guess we can go and we can just kind of go through and talk about each of them.
You know, for some
So,
odd reason, I do have my own favorite chapter. Do you guys?
okay.
Wow, that's crazy. I think
I
I
may
do
or may
too.
not have one as well.
Oh, I like this. I like this. So, my favorite chapter was Lone Ranger and Tonto fist fight in the heaven. It was the title chapter, and it's chapter where like the guy goes to, I think was it Victor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Victor goes to a 7-Eleven, right? And he's like, he goes to get a creamsicle at 3 in the morning, which is so real. That's literally me. And he goes in the store, the cashier's uncomfortable, and he's like, wow, like, don't worry. I was a cashier at 7-Eleven that worked graveyard shift. I got robbed myself. I get it. And the cashier chuckles, and then he gives him the creamsicle for free. And after that, he finally goes to Seattle, or he's living in Seattle, and he's got his white girlfriend, and he and his girlfriend are fighting constantly. And after a really bad fight, the narrator dreams that he and his girlfriend are an Indian chief and a missionary's wife. And then their romance starts like a war between the Indians and white people. And then the next day, he breaks up with her and he moves back to the reservation. And then because he was attending college, his mom, when he moves back to the res, is disappointed in him that he didn't get a job and is like constantly yelling at him. And then the narrator basically says, if I lose a basketball game to the chief of the Bureau of Indian Affairs son, who is like really good at basketball, he'll get a job. And then he loses, of course, because the kid's good at basketball. And he finds a job and then moves to Spokane. And then at the end of the chapter, his girlfriend calls him and they forgive each other and yada yada, right? But I think this chapter to me was just so like, I don't know. It was the one chapter that felt so just easy and comfortable. And I think the whole like the love section where it's like the him and his girlfriend causing a war, in his dream, and then the next day him breaking up with her. I don't know. It just felt so like it felt very human. Like I was just reading that whole section and reading even just like the 7-Eleven section and the basketball section, all that stuff. It was just like comforting to read, like a big hug from the reader.
No, I like low-key get that because that's actually why I picked mine. The main thing about like, the approximate size of my favorite tumor, you got James. He gets diagnosed with cancer. He doesn't stop joking about it, and his wife's getting like fed up because he's not being serious about anything. And it's not that he doesn't have the capacity to, it's just that if he doesn't make everything a joke, I feel like he's going to start seeing everything around him crumble. But then he sees it crumble around him anyways, and at that point, I believe he feels like his humor is all he has left. And we see him go into the bar and try and like reconcile before she actually like permanently leaves, and it just doesn't work. And she like tells him that if you keep making these jokes, I'm not gonna be here.
I think all of us can kind of relate to having to use humor to cope with pain, because I don't know, it's so much easier for, I feel like, us as people to just make jokes about it rather than kind of face the consequences or face the reality of the graveness of the situation in front of us. A part of that chapter was so sad because of course, like what ends up happening in the end of the chapter, but also just like that comfort and the just relating to him so much, because it was just like it was so real. Everything in this book, like I can't express the feeling of this book because you just have to kind of read it to know, because it's just so real. Everything in this book just, it feels like a memory. None of this feels like a story. It feels like we are reading somebody's memories. And I don't know, just that feeling of reading this book made it one of my.
I think out of all the chapters, I think one of my personal favorites was definitely the absurdly titled. Hold on, I don't have the exact title. Let me grab it, bro. Here we go. Because my father always said he was the only Indian who saw Jimi Hendrix play the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock. Now, this chapter starts out, it's basically just kind of a. It's everything that a son, like, relates to when they think of their dad, I want to say. It's really personal in that sort of way where it's like Victor has this own little photo that he cherishes of his dad where he has like this gun protesting the Vietnam War. And he's dressed up in his little hippie, his dad's dressed up in a hippie outfit. Like it goes from like, that to like his relationship with his mom and music. And one of the big things about, because I love Jimi Hendrix personally. I don't know about you guys, but Jimi Hendrix rocks. But Jimi Hendrix, everyone has that own special musician or artist or group or whatnot that they really just feel. And again, kind of going into what you two were saying earlier with, how James Many Horses or with the Tonto Lone Ranger Fist Find a Heaven chapter. It's just, it felt so kind of human to just the author not being able to describe what the feeling was like per se, but just kind of living in the moment where it's very clear that the Jimi Hendrix music was really affecting him. And I think I also just really relate to the chapter. I think that's why I like it so much. It's just, it's got, the relationship with the father and whatnot and the music. And it's also got the aspect of the, almost more of being in love with the idea of the person than the person. And just kind of going down that rabbit hole of they don't love you, but you love them. But it hit home. I didn't like how much it hit.
I think there's so much in this book that is just like so relatable to all the things we don't want to talk about that makes it hard to discuss because of it. Because a lot of the topics in this book are so, you have to be very vulnerable if you want to express your relation to them because of how, I guess, just I don't want to say sad because it's not really sad, but I guess just melancholic, right? It's like that undertone where it's like there's a good feeling to it, but there's still that kind of like bittersweet feeling to the whole thing.
I gotta say, I feel like that plays perfectly into my favorite chapter in the book, actually, because, even both off of the tone that you just said, David, and the chapter that Maddox just described, one of my favorite chapters was what it means to say Phoenix, Arizona. And basically, this chapter follows, it follows Victor, is many years after, his dad had separated from his mother and he left the reservation completely, moving to many places, ending up in Arizona. And it starts with Victor learning of his father's death, and he goes to the tribal council to get money. They don't have enough for him to do anything that he wants to do. So what does he do? He has no choice but to ask Thomas builds a fire for help. And he does decide to go with him. And they fly to Phoenix, Arizona, meet this Olympic run-up lady. It was a interesting meeting there. But they end up going to this trailer where Victor's dad was found. And, they describe how it was the smell was awful because his dad had been there for a week before he was discovered, his body. So basically he goes in and gets a couple of artifacts and then, he comes back, they come out and they talk a little bit, and then Thomas Buzzifier has a really interesting conversation with Victor when they make it back to the reservation, pretty much just talking about how, um, you know, he had this experience with Victor's dad that he didn't even know about. And it pretty much ends up, speaking about how he envisioned that his dad was a salmon, I believe, and that he was jumping in the water. And then, but anyways, that chapter just stood out for so many reasons. And it was just like, it really set the tone, because he didn't really necessarily express a huge like sadness anywhere in the chapter, just that sort of melancholic tone that has been present throughout.
Thank you, Jackson. That was very beautifully put.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
you want to know what is way more beautifully put?
What?
Is today's sponsor.
Oh.
This episode of the Gentrified Gentleman podcast is brought to you by the Hoopin' Hooves program. Have a horse that's born. Who wrote this? Have a horse that is boring and can't do anything cool? Well, that's all about to change with the help of the Hoopin' Hooves program. Your horse will be professionally trained to become an all-star basketball pro, dunking on every being that comes within 100 feet of it. For the low and fair price of $5,000, this could be your reality. Text 1-800-HORSING-AROUND for more information. Thank you, Horsing Around, for the fucking paycheck. That was lit. Anyway, are there any extra ideas that anyone wants to share? Any overall themes that you want to talk about? Any specific moments that really shot out to you, or do you guys just want to move on?
I'm gonna plead the fifth.
Okay.
I also plead the fifth.
Okay. Jackson, are you pleading the fifth on this one?
Actually, my host, I was wondering, do you have like a general question? Maybe
My host.
I thought you called me my
Yes,
hose. I'm gonna be
King.
honest.
Yes, King.
I do have a general question. So there's a quote in the book, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on the meaning of it because I'm schizophrenic and I don't know, right? The quote is, "Imagination is the only weapon on the reservation." Thoughts?
Great rhyme scheme. Second of all, I don't know. It just seems it's just like the only way to cope with the reality of the situation on the reservation and the many problems that arise on that place is to just imagine a different place or a happier life or happier, to delude yourself against the reality of the world.
I don't think they explicitly touch on this, but I think a big part of the reservation and the people on it was that they survived by looking to the future in their hopes and their dreams.
I would also like to add on top of that, which I think a lot of the methods that the people on the reservation used in order to get away from the hardship of life was complete and utter escapism. Like you said, they constantly look to the future, and in the chapter A Drug Called Tradition, they take the psychedelic mushrooms and they trip crazy. The alcoholism is, escapism. The father only really coming back and able to be restful when he listens to Jimi Hendrix. I mean, music is also a form of escapism. Like the same thing in that quote, imagination is the only weapon on the reservation. I think it all just comes back to this main idea that life on the reservation is extremely, extremely hard, not just because of the financial situation, but because of the familial structure, that when it comes down to it, when you're at the grassroots, the only way to help yourself is to just imagine for yourself a better future.
Oh.
Honestly, my closing thoughts on this are that's really good.
I hate you, Maddox. I loved this book. There was so much to this book that it was just so real, and like a lot of the characters in the book, it was escapism. It was kind of just like, while it was escapism, it was also looking back. It was it's one of those books where you read it and then you look back at other things in your life and you think about yourself in not the same situation, but in your situation that mirrors it, because a lot of the situations in this book are extremely relatable to others in, our lives, whether it's directly related, where it's like the same situation, or just the feeling that comes through it, or the feeling that the author to, convey in the text. And I enjoyed this book a lot. I would say this was better than 100 Years of Solitude, 100%. Not just because it was shorter, but I actually felt like I got more out of this book in the 250 pages that it was.
Yeah, it's one of those books I imagine just kind of like cinematically reading during like a nice afternoon outside. and like having that actually be pleasant. It's just a good book. It's hard to describe just how wonderful it is to just kind of ingest and enjoy.
Like, I can't say I directly relate to many, if any, of the things detailed in this story, but like, I can connect with, the emotions of the characters, and I think Sherman Alexie just did such a great job conveying his own experiences in a way that was interesting and interesting to read, while at the same time, feeling meaningful.
In conclusion, this was a wonderful book, and I had a wonderful time reading it, and I think all of us did, as we've all kind of given our thoughts and closing thoughts on it. But thank you for listening to this edition of The Gentrified Gentleman. Again, I am David Seville, your extremely handsome, charismatic host with a wonderful voice. And we'll probably see you in some amount of months.